Poor black girl calls a billionaire. Your son is unconscious on the street. Blood spilled onto the sidewalk that night as laughter echoed from the crowd. But it wasn't joy, it was cruelty. A 12-year-old boy lay broken, while a barefoot girl clutched a cracked phone, whispering to a billionaire father that his son was dying. In the glittering city, where glass towers scraped the sky, power meant nothing against the helplessness of a child. And in that collision of wealth and weakness, shame and courage, everything changed. What would you have done in his place? Welcome to Emotional Echoes, a channel where emotions come alive and every story leaves a lasting echo in your heart. Now let me tell you what happened. Stay with my video till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far this story spreads. Lucas was 12, but on the ground he looked far younger, fragile and broken. Blood slid from his temple, his body limp, while older boys circled with their phones out, laughing as if his pain was a show. Maya clutched a cracked phone, her fingers trembling so hard she nearly dropped it, whispering into the receiver that his son was dying right there on the sidewalk. On the other end of the line, Daniel Carter froze. He was a man used to numbers, contracts and control, but those words shattered every wall he had built. He heard the child's sobs repeat the same phrase, and his breath broke in half as panic surged through him. He left without answering questions, without hearing the voices that tried to stop him. He moved like a man chased by fire, heart hammering against his ribs, mind clinging to the image of his son bleeding alone. Every step felt too slow, every second a theft, and the words kept echoing in his skull. His son was about to die, and all his power meant nothing if he wasn't there. When the helicopter lifted, Daniel gripped the seat until his knuckles turned pale. His jaw locked, eyes empty, chest burning with the terror of being too late. He had not run in years, but now every muscle screamed the same prayer. Let me reach him before he slips away. Daniel's shoes hit the pavement before the helicopter blades stopped. He ran until his knees slammed the ground beside Lucas. His boy's chest barely rose, lips cracked, blood sticky in his hair. Daniel reached out, desperate, but a medic blocked him with a hand that felt colder than the night. The medic scribbled on a clipboard, muttering about protocol, as if Lucas were just another line on a form. Daniel's rage clawed up his throat, but another voice cut him sharper. A police officer nearby snorted and said fights like this happened every week in the Bronx. He added that the boy should have learned not to pick the wrong crowd. The words stabbed Daniel deeper than the sight of blood. He wanted to shout that this was not routine, that this was his son, but his voice stuck as he turned and saw Maya. The girl's hoodie swallowed her thin frame, her bare feet pressed against freezing asphalt. She hugged herself, shivering, her eyes fixed on Lucas as though she could will him back. A nurse approached and told Maya to step back, snapping that children without guardians had no place near the patient. Maya shook her head, whispering that she could not leave him alone. Her words cracked in the air, steady despite the tears sliding down her face. Daniel's chest collapsed inward, shame burning through him. He had all the power, all the money, and yet it was this child who stood barefoot in the cold, refusing to move while strangers laughed and scrawled notes. He thought power kept his son safe, but tonight power had failed. Only Maya's courage kept Lucas from being abandoned on that sidewalk. When the stretcher wheels squeaked and the medic called out vitals, Daniel stumbled back, fists trembling, helpless against the ticking seconds. Around him, phones glowed as people filmed, some chuckling, some shaking their heads. The world watched like spectators at a show, while his son fought for breath. Daniel stepped closer, whispering Lucas's name, his voice breaking into the noise. There was no answer, only the beeping of a monitor and the rattling of wheels. He followed, heart heavy, torn between fury at a world so cruel and guilt for every year he had failed to be the father his boy deserved. Lucas lay unconscious, machines marking time with steady beeps that felt cruel in their calmness. Daniel sat hunched in the chair, elbows on his knees, staring at the boy's pale hand on the sheet. He had built an empire, but he could not lift a single finger to pull his son back from the edge. His phone buzzed on the table. At first, he ignored it, but the vibration wouldn't stop. When he finally glanced at the screen, the message glared at him. A colleague from years ago had written, "Billionaire who talks about saving the world can't even protect his own blood." Daniel's chest hollowed as if someone had struck him. He turned the phone face down, but the words kept cutting, sharper than any headline. Downstairs, reporters were shouting into cameras, their voices climbing with mockery. They played clips of Daniel speaking at conferences about innovation and leadership, placing them alongside shaky video of Lucas bleeding on the street. The contrast was vicious, designed to strip him bare in front of the world. To them, he was a hypocrite, and to himself, he felt even lower. He pressed his palms over his eyes, trying to hide from the truth, pressing down like chains. But then he heard a sound, soft and trembling, and he lowered his hands. Maya had slipped back into the room. She was sitting by the bed now, her chin barely above the rail, whispering Lucas's name like a prayer. Daniel's throat tightened. He had given his son gifts worth thousands, vacations and houses, but he had not given him this. The simple act of being present, calling his name, refusing to let silence win. It was a girl who had nothing who sat here giving more love than he had offered in years. He watched her, his body rigid, while shame spread like fire under his skin. Lucas lay motionless, caught between worlds, and Daniel realized he had let strangers give his son what he had withheld. Compassion, loyalty, the promise of not being left alone, and the sight of that broke him more than the headlines ever could. Daniel had barely closed his eyes when the door swung open again. A woman from CPS entered, heels clicking against the tile, her expression flat as stone. She didn't look at Lucas, didn't acknowledge the machines or the child's fragile breaths. Her focus was only on the folder in her hands. She spoke in a tone that carried no hesitation. Maya had no birth certificate on record, no official guardian who met legal standards. Her grandmother was sick, and therefore the state considered her unsafe. The woman's voice stayed steady, like she had repeated this countless times. Then came the words that cut Daniel to the bone. "Children without papers are a danger to society," she said. "We have to isolate them." Daniel felt his stomach twist. Maya shrank into the chair, her arms tight around her knees, eyes darting like she was waiting for someone to drag her away. The worker kept talking about procedures, deadlines, placement. Each word stripped more of the child's humanity, reducing her to a problem to be filed away. Maya's face crumpled, and the dam broke. Tears rolled as she sobbed that she only wanted to stay with her grandmother. Her voice cracked into pieces, saying they didn't understand, that her grandmother was all she had left. Her words spilled out like shards, desperate and raw, each one shattering against the silence. Daniel reached out, trying to steady her hand, but she pulled back, not in rejection of him, but from the terror of losing everything. He had seen men fight over millions in boardrooms, but he had never seen desperation like this. This wasn't greed, it was survival. It was belonging. Behind them, Lucas lay still, machines marking time. Daniel's chest burned with the cruelty of it all. His son might wake to find the only person who refused to abandon him torn away by strangers. And Maya, the child who had saved his boy, was being condemned by a system too blind to see her heart. The CPS worker closed the folder with a snap, promising a follow-up within days. Then she left, as if nothing had been said. Silence returned, heavier than before, broken only by Maya's sobs. Each sound drilled into Daniel deeper than any insult the outside world could throw. He showed up like someone who owned the place, swagger slow and eyes hungry. Maya froze the moment she saw him, the color draining from her face, because she knew every step he took meant trouble. He reminded her of the small things he used to make her do, the errands that were never innocent, how she once stole bread so he would trade silence for a few coins, how she ran messages for him and learned to keep her head down. His voice was low and casual when he said that she belonged to him, that kids like her had prices and places, and that rich men were only useful until they were bored. The words were meant to crush, to make her feel expendable again. Maya hugged herself, knees drawn in, whispering that she would not go back. Daniel arrived and the air changed. He stepped forward before he even thought, not as a corporate titan, but as a man who had been called by a child's fear. He put himself between Maya and the man, and his posture was a shield more than a show. Reggie just snorted and smiled, as if Daniel's suit amused him. He shrugged off the man's presence and spat, that money did not mean anything here, that paper was the only thing that mattered, and on paper Maya did not exist. The taunt landed like a hand in Daniel's face, because he knew it was true in the bluntest way. Daniel's vow came out quiet and hard. He promised to protect her, to fight whatever paper stood between a child and her safe place. But even as his voice broke with the promise, he felt the cold fact of rules pressing in. The law did not bend for vows. It followed forms and signatures and boxes checked on a page. The exchange ended without fists. Reggie left with a laugh meant to echo, and Maya's shoulders trembled as the sound faded. Around them the world continued with its daily cruelty, some people turning away, others watching for a moment, then moving on. Daniel stood there, thinking of all the times his power had failed to mean anything real. That night, the headlines would call him a man doing charity or staging a photo op. But in that space between a child's trembling and a man's promise, something else had shifted. Daniel understood he could buy many things, but he had to learn how to use what he had to shield someone smaller than his mistakes. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with whispers and the shuffle of papers. At the front, CPS attorneys laid out their argument with sharp precision. They said Daniel Carter was not fit to be a guardian, that his wealth made him reckless, that Maya was being used as a prop to fix his image. Daniel sat still at first, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the polished wood of the table. He had faced senators, investors, even governments, but this moment weighed heavier than all of them. It was not about money or power. It was about a little girl who had stood in the cold to keep his son alive. When the judge asked if he wished to respond, Daniel rose slowly. His voice shook at the beginning, not from fear but from the weight of truth. He admitted he had failed before, that he had been a father who disappeared into grief and work, leaving his boy to grow up alone. He said Maya had reminded him of what it meant to see someone, to stay when it was easier to walk away. Every word came raw. He told the court that money could not explain why a barefoot girl had chosen to call him instead of running. He said he was not here for redemption in headlines, but because the moment she saved his son, she became part of their family. His hands trembled as he spoke, and for once the billionaire mask slipped, revealing a man stripped bare. The CPS lawyer pressed again, insisting sentiment was not enough, that guardianship required stability, not speeches. The judge then turned to Maya, asking her what she wanted. The room shifted, every eye on a child who looked too small for the chair she sat in. Maya's fingers twisted together, her voice barely above a whisper at first. She said she did not need a mansion or glittering toys. She only wanted a place where she would not be left behind. Her eyes filled as she added that Daniel looked at her like she mattered, and that was more than she had ever known. The courtroom went silent. Even the CPS attorneys hesitated, their arguments hanging hollow against the weight of her plea. The judge's pen stilled above the paper, her gaze lingering on Maya with something softer than law. For a long moment, no one moved. Daniel stood there, chest tight, eyes burning, knowing the decision had not been made yet, but he also knew the truth had been spoken. A man had confessed his failures, and a child had asked for nothing more than not to be invisible. Judge Moore leaned forward, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the silence. She asked Maya if she wanted to stay with Mr. Carter. The room held its breath as the girl looked down at her hands, then slowly lifted her eyes toward Daniel. Maya's chin trembled, but her words came clear. She said he saw her, that when everyone else passed by, he looked at her like she mattered. She said she was not invisible anymore, and that was why she wanted to stay. The judge nodded once, her gaze steady, and the gavel came down with a sound that felt heavier than stone. Temporary guardianship was granted to Daniel Carter. The announcement filled the courtroom with murmurs, half of relief, half of doubt. Daniel closed his eyes, air rushing from his lungs as if he had been holding his breath for years. He glanced at Maya, who gave him the smallest nod, her face streaked with tears, but glowing with something that looked like hope. For a fleeting second, the weight of the world eased. But outside those doors, shadows waited. Reggie's name lingered in police reports, his presence whispered in the alleys of the city. Daniel knew the ruling was not the end. It was only a fragile beginning, and the darkness had not given up its claim. Still, as Maya slipped her hand into his on the way out, he felt a strength he had not known before. For the first time, he was not walking alone, and for the first time, she was no longer unseen. Reggie's last attempt came at dawn, when he tried to slip into the schoolyard, where Maya's name had finally been placed on the roster. He thought no one was watching, but the cameras caught him, and the police closed in before he could take a step inside. Maya was called in to give her statement, her small voice steady as she told the truth, and that truth was enough to put an end to his shadow. Days later, Daniel sat beside Lucas's hospital bed when a finger twitched against his palm. He looked down to see his son's eyes open, tired but alive, and then he felt the boy's weak grip tighten. Lucas whispered that he wanted them to be a real family, not just father and son, but a home that included Maya too. Daniel bent over, pressing his forehead against his son's hand, the dam finally breaking inside his chest. He promised that no child under his roof would ever feel invisible again. Soon after, he announced the creation of the No Child Invisible Foundation, a pledge to fight for children who lived in the cracks where the world refused to look. That evening, Maya sat at a desk with a notebook she had carried for years. The pages were worn, filled with scraps of prayers and drawings no one had ever seen. She picked up a pencil and wrote slowly, her handwriting shaky but sure. She wrote that she was not invisible anymore. The words glowed brighter than any headline, brighter than any judgment. They were proof that a broken girl and a broken family had found each other in the wreckage. And for the first time, the story did not end in silence. It ended with hope. From the moment a barefoot girl refused to leave a dying boy's side, to the day they became a family, bound not by blood but by love, this story carried us through shame, pain, and finally redemption. It reminds us that compassion can heal wounds money cannot, and that true family is found where hearts choose not to abandon each other. Beyond one father and two children, it is a call for all of us to see those who feel invisible. If this story touched you, share your feelings in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share emotional echoes so more hearts can be reached. Thanks for listening.